morning or afternoon. We are very happy you're here. We'll give a second for folks to get settled. My name is Kathleen Trapphagen, and I co-facilitate the Ed Funders Out of School Time Impact Group, along with Rebecca Goldberg, my colleague. And you are at the third Friday monthly convening. And today we are going to talk with folks from Boys and Girls Club of America and also an alum from a Boys and Girls Club in my state, Massachusetts. And we're going to talk about the Youth Right Now survey, what Boys and Girls Club of America found out when they asked young people what they thought about a lot of different things. We're going to dig in a little bit on that survey, and we will also be able to hear from Faith, who's the alum, about how that resonates with her and her experience and what kind of broader implications she's taking from it. And then we'll have time to go into small groups where we can all think about how all of this resonates with our own work. So that's all going to happen in an hour. And so I'm going to turn it very quickly over to Omar. But before I do, I'd love for people to, first of all, change your Zoom name to include your pronouns and your organization. That all helps us to get to know each other. And the intro question, which I'd love for you to answer in the chat, your name, your organization, your pronouns, and then just an example of a way that young people are positively supported. So that may be something that you do in your program. It may be something that you witnessed happen to a young person in your life. It doesn't have to be professional. It could be personal too. And I just want to start out by getting people thinking about all the ways that people in this community support youth positively. And so we can all learn something from each other about ways that we uplift for each other, and just think a little bit about the power that this community has to do this. So that's the intro question. And I'm going to turn over basically the rest of the meeting to our Boys and Girls Club team, starting with Omar Guessous. And you're going to be the first speaker, and then we're going to hear from Alex Knapp, and then we're going to hear from Faith. So taking it away, Omar.
All right. Hello, friends. Thank you for having us here. Looking forward to spending the next hour with you. I will say before we start digging into data, just, a lot of the why of why my team, and Boys and Girls Clubs of America do research and evaluation is partly an answer to the question Kathleen raised, which is, at the end of the day, data is about helping us do a better job listening and paying attention, and checking our assumptions and challenging our ways of doing things, and continually getting better, and humbling ourselves in the work, right, as adults, in the ways in which we try to support young people and partner with them. Just to give you a quick essentially run of show is provide a bit of an overview of, where this information is coming from that we'll be sharing, then really going to spend time on a couple topic areas. There's a lot more we can talk about, and on each of these, there's a lot more we can get into. But we want to make sure to also, beyond the couple topics around how young people are doing, feeling, around the issues of well-being and mental health, and around questions of voice and leadership and activism, want to save a little bit of time to also talk about how we're thinking of this from a policy perspective, and like Kathleen shared, to also hear some reflections from one of the many terrific, wonderful young people that we have had the privilege of working with, and that'll be Faith. And this is where she will keep me honest on, like, all right, Omar, you got this right, and this does not resonate with what I'm seeing. But then we'll have time for Q&A, and we'll get into conversation. Oh, and by the way, just briefly about myself, my name is Omar Guessous. I lead our research and evaluation team at Boys and Girls Clubs of America. Been working with clubs for going on 11 years. I'm a community psychologist by background, and my life's work is about applied research and youth development, ultimately. And just, super quick, background on this thing we're calling youth right now. We have, as a national youth serving organization for over a decade now, have had an outcome measurement system that we call the National Youth Outcomes Initiative, or NYOI for short. That has been a way in which we have started to really tackle the question of how do we use data to, one, better understand the kinds of experiences that young people are having in clubs, the way, how they are doing, ways in which we are potentially having or not having positive impact, and ultimately, how can we utilize this data and leverage it both to continue to improve, continue to learn, continue to get better, but also to help us tell our story, right? And tell our story as Boys and Girls Clubs, but also contribute to the broader learning and story around out of school time and youth development as a whole. You may see some very marketing language here because we like to brag about we have the largest privately owned data set on young people. But it is true, right? Given our scale, we on an annual basis collect information from over in the past year, over 130,000 young people ages 9 and up. Pre-pandemic, that was even upwards of 200,000. And so we have some confidence in that this data is also relevant and helpful, not just for Boys and Girls Clubs, but even beyond, because it's coming from a wide variety of settings, regions, communities, and so on. And just a quick also a piece of background is, when we talk about our National Youth Outcomes Initiatives, first, it's more than a single annual survey. A lot of the information I'm going to share here is really just coming from a couple sources. But the intent of this, as we are continuing to try to improve, is also about having a portfolio of ways in which we are supporting and partnering with our clubs to utilize data to find out, on an ongoing basis, how are we creating safe, positive environments, experiences, relationships, right? How are we using data to engage staff in real decision making? How are we leveraging evidence to really make good decisions? And so there are a number of pieces to it. The two pieces that we're really going to draw from in a very brief conversation here is one, a large scale member survey, right? That's where we assess, attitudes, skills, club experiences, how young people see themselves, and so on. But also this other growing source of data that we've had that's really been focused on tweens and teens, not only club members, but also non-club members. That's really been designed to support clubs and really better understanding the needs, the perspectives, the interests, the well-being of the young people they're serving from a needs assessment perspective. And you'll see a few data points coming from that. And they'll always be flagged at the bottom of the slide, so we're transparent about what the source is. And that really the two sort of big themes that I want to touch on here is one around how young people are feeling. It should be no surprise for everybody here, right? There's been this challenge and growing crisis really around mental health among young people, but also we're seeing some bright spots amidst that. And so we'll talk a little bit about both sides of that coin, and then we'll really shift into the fact that there's a lot of passion and there's a lot of real challenge to us as adults around some of the issues that we really need to be paying attention to from a youth perspective in order to improve our societies, communities, and world. And so we'll touch on that. So I'll dig in. If I'm talking too fast or going too fast, just drop something in the chat and someone will force me to slow down because we're just so excited to share so much with you, right? So around well-being, mental health, I think we're all aware of a bit of the context, right? It's been over a decade that there's been a growing reporting of and a growing prevalence of mental health challenges, whether on the clinical side or non-clinical side, but where we're seeing and hearing from young people more and more of just feelings of hopelessness, anxiety, sadness, fear, and so on. That has been accentuated most likely by the pandemic, but was not caused by the pandemic because it predates it. And I will share that in our data, we see some of that too, right? We see a bit of this, a mixed picture, right? When we ask our young people, teens in particular, right? How have you been feeling lately, right? And what you can see on the left in green, right? The full boxes mean they're telling us they're feeling this often, but the lighter boxes is this is still happening, sometimes on a frequent basis. Is that we see this sense of optimism and motivation, hopefulness, and joy, coupled with a pretty substantial proportion of our young people are telling us, a third are telling us, on a regular basis, I feel overwhelmed, I feel anxious. And others really speaking to anger and sadness. And I'll note even the anger piece, we see even greater rates among our teens, particularly our middle schoolers. And this is why conversations around social emotional development, emotional well-being in general, mental health are growing. And what you'll see is we see also many teens really concerned about this and wanting really to make a difference in this space. This is a mixed picture, because on one hand, right, when we ask all our young people, this is data from ages 9 and up, right, like, how do you approach situations where they're challenging? We see this idea, this optimism and perseverance, right? Young people are telling us, they feel like when they hit a roadblock, when they come across a difficult issue, whether it's at school, whether it's in a relationship, whether it's on a project, right? That they feel like they keep working at it, that they feel like they can, talk to themselves and tell themselves they'll do better next time. And at the same time, that they're also struggling with some very concrete coping skills, right? That they also have this challenge of just like, having these thoughts overwhelm them and can't stop worrying about issues that we're coming across, or have time sometimes finding help and finding support and finding the assistance. And that is why we so deeply and firmly believe in the power and potential of out-of-school time programming, because this is where we are able to provide young people with more assets, more resources, and also experiences that help them practice and develop some of these skills we're talking about. Tied to this, when we look at some national data on, on where do young people feel like they have an adult they can turn to, right? What you see here is, when we ask them about school in particular, right? And this is data coming from a survey called Youth Truth. You can see that, it's half or less of young people feel like there's an adult at school that they can turn to if they're feeling upset or stressed or having a challenge. But when we ask a similar question in the Boys and Girls Club context, and I firmly believe this also applies to all of our other friends here, right? In the out of school time context. I don't mean to just say this is clubs, but it's really about after school programming in general. We see, a much higher rate of young people really feeling like there's someone they can turn to. I think the other thing to really pay attention to on the left, right? You look at high schoolers in particular, how there's this like decline, right? The farther you go in secondary school, the less likely you are to feel like there's an adult there for you. But on the other end, in the blue bars, you see it's the opposite direction. And so it just further reinforces the importance in particular of not missing the boat, in particular as young people are transitioning through middle school and dealing with puberty and going through all the other things that are happening, and not losing that connection and losing that engagement at that point, which is something we're really honestly grappling with as Boys and Girls Clubs, especially coming out of the pandemic. Other than my favorite data point, honestly, is also like, we just ask, in an open-ended fashion of young people, like, just what do adults need to know, right? What do we need to know to better support you, better show up for you, better understand what's going on? And there's these three themes that I really want to pull out, right? It's idea of, well, we need to be more patient. We need to provide unconditional love and support. And also we need to provide some very tangible support and assistance, because a theme we keep hearing, it was really, it's quite striking. It is quite striking to really read a lot of these responses. It's so much of it is, as you see, like I'm trying my best. Like, give me some time, give me some grace. Yes, I may look like I'm stumbling. Yes, it may look like I'm making mistakes. But that's part of the process. And I'm also trying my best, and don't let me down. Don't walk away from me at the same time. But also don't sit there and lecture me all day long, right? And that's the dance that all of us as professionals, as parents and caregivers, and so on are always dancing. Lastly, I will say that particular piece of the grace and the patience is particularly important, I think, right now, as we know that young people, teens, young adults, thinking about future, thinking about workforce, thinking about making, a living wage can feel really scary right now because there's lots of reasons why that may feel a bit more shaky. And I bring that up because we also need to be very cognizant of the fact that the young people also have a number of concerns about what that next phase is going to look like, what it's going to feel like to actually go out into the workforce and look for a job. And you see here just some of the issues that they tell us they're particularly concerned about, from family responsibilities to not having the qualifications to just not knowing where to start. And it's why, particularly in thinking about teens, for all of us collectively to really invest more, not just in preparing young people for that, like graduating from high school, but really for everything that comes after, for navigating adulthood, for figuring out the path and knowing where to go for help is so particularly important. I'm going to continue to fly down y'all to move in a bit into the second theme, so we can really get into conversation. Here, I want to shift a little bit to a related but different topic of, the issues, particularly social issues that young people care about most. And one thing I think we all know instinctively, but also the data tells us is we are watching or part of a generation where there is greater people are paying more attention to what's going on in the world and care deeply about what's going on in the world and don't care about a single issue. Don't just care about a single issue, right? Our young people are multifaceted, have deep passions, and see themselves more and more as activists or digital activists in particular, leveraging social media, which I know Faith will touch on. And that is something that's very important. So when we ask our teens what are the issues you care most about, it's hard not to notice that first bar, right? And this is consistent. This is whether this is true whether we're talking about teens who are deeply engaged, right, in clubs and groups and whatnot, or teens who are not very engaged. This is true whether we're talking about older teens or even tweens. Is the issue of mental health is top of mind for more than a third of our young people, which and this is when we just ask them, like, what are the top 3 issues you most care about, right? And then everything else is sort of a bit of a smattering that probably reflects all the things that are going around in the country, right? Everything from issues of freedom of speech and expression, wherever young people lie on the political spectrum on that, right? To issues of violence and guns, to issues of justice and equity and inclusion around issues of race, issues of sexual orientation, issues of reproductive rights. But these reflect a lot of the conversations we're happening. Here's what's even more interesting about this, right? So look at this, but I want to show it to you in a slightly different way, which is we also ask young people, like, how much are you affected by each of these issues, right? Affected may mean whatever it means to you, right? Affected in terms of your family has encountered issues around this, or it speaks to one of your identities or whatnot. The blue in these bars represents the proportion young people say they're affected by this. So to give you an example, if you look at mental health, about 3/4 of young teens who are telling us mental health is one of the issues I care most about are also telling us they are actually directly impacted and affected by issues of mental health. I don't know why there's fireworks behind me right now on my screen. Zoom does weird things these days. I don't know if y'all saw that. And so a takeaway here is that a lot of how like us adults are making decisions about the issues we lean into is often informed by personal experience, right, and what's going on, but also is not and only determined by that, because we still have a good amount of gray. We still have a good amount of teens who are caring about issues because intellectually or otherwise understand this is important and is important for their generation beyond. I'll just share one last thing is also when we ask which of the issues you believe your generation will have the greatest impact on. The list is similar, but the ordering is slightly different. The top 2 being mental health, but also LGBTQ issues, which I think speaks also to some evolution in the culture and the conversations and the openness and acceptance and inclusion that we see among young people these days. So I was asked to pause here to see about clarifying questions before I hand it over to Alex. I see a big number in chat, so Kathleen, I'm going to turn to you here.
Sure. Yes. Okay. So I think, Alex, you answered in the chat Dara's question about survey sample age and demographics of respondents. Maybe demographics a bit of respondents, Omar?
Yes. So demographics, good question. So in general, speak general because the answer is also specific difference about for each specific data point. When we're talking about club members as a whole, we're talking about 2/3 of those are ages 9 to 12, and 1/3 are ages 13 and up. When we're talking about teens, it's about 2/3 in that 13 to 15 age range and 1/3 in the upper age range. In terms of race, data as a whole, I'm going to oversimplify here, but is about 1/3 Black African American, about 1/3 Latino Hispanic, about 25% white, and the rest being a smattering of Native American, multiracial, and other identities. Hopefully that gives folks a sense
Yeah.
of
And is it
the
young people are from the whole country?
Yes, yes. From the whole country, most of this data is from young people specifically affiliated with clubs, meaning they're a member, they participate, but yes, from every state and every particular community you can think of. Yeah.
Okay, so that was another question, which is that the respondents are club participants. How do these metrics compare with non-participants if you have found similar studies?
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on the particular question we're looking at. So that's why, for example, sometimes we present some comparisons, and we have more of these on our website. So to take this, for example, is when we're comparing club members to non-club members. When we get to more of the outcome data, we do a lot of these comparisons around risk behaviors and so on. But at the same time, you know, I guess our position, our belief is also that most of the young people we serve and represent are essentially the young people of the country, where this may be a little bit different, particularly around economics, right? We tend to, yes, serve more young people from lower income households than the national average. And data does have more diversity probably than is the national averages. So those would be the two big differences.
Okay, great. And I know we want to turn it over to Alex. Priscilla had a question about the Boys and Girls Club programming, special programs for children in PKK age 4, 6, so I'm going to let you answer that in the chat, Omar.
Okay, yeah,
that seems
absolutely.
Okay. And then we can go to Alex.
Amazing. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Omar. I always love hearing you present because I'm always checking my show. Okay, am I getting my talking points right when I talk to members of Congress? So I always appreciate it. I am Alex Knapp, a member of BGCA's Federal Government Relations team. I will be pretty concise here because I want to make sure we have time for faith and more questions from you all. But if you have questions, you're welcome to reach out to me afterwards. In terms of policy implications for kind of all the data and youth voice input that Omar has just shared, there are a number of ways it has impacted our work on our federal government relations team and across our government relations department. One of the main ones is it had a big impact a couple of years ago when we were updating our strategic policy priorities, which you could see those kind of three main buckets on the screen here of academic recovery and success, youth well-being, which for us includes youth mental health, and life and workforce readiness. We looked at this data, we tried to find other sources to make sure that what we were advocating for on the Hill was not just important to Boys and Girls Club as organizations, but also to the youth who make up the clubs. It also influences a lot of our advocacy materials and talking points. I have an example of a draft thing. I should have put draft on it because it's not quite final yet. But document there that we're going to use in a few weeks for our big fly-in in Capitol Hill of club leaders. And we will often use data points from the National Youth Outcomes Initiative / youth right now materials because they're just really compelling talking points. I mean, especially the one about youth finding an adult that they feel comfortable talking to in school versus out of school time. As some of you may have heard, we have also worked on sharing this information with federal agency partners and congressional stakeholders. Omar did another great presentation kind of like this last year that was really impactful with our partners in the federal space. And then the last way, kind of main way we've been working with this data and this idea of youth voice in our advocacy is in a couple of initiatives we have going concurrently. One is Think, Learn, Create, Change, which is an opportunity for clubs to work with teens. And it's kind of like a youth advocacy training in a way. If you think about what's an interest to you, you learn about that issue, and then you try to create change in your community. That's a really short description of it. If you want more, let me know. But it culminates in this event called Summit for America's Youth, which we are doing for our third time this July. Which you can see pictures of it here on the screen. Hundreds of Boys and Girls Club youth from across the country come to DC. They have additional training on leadership and advocacy. There are more learning opportunities for them in the advocacy space, and they have a chance to talk with their elected officials on Capitol Hill. So you can see here, it was a pretty big crew last year, so we're really excited to do it again this July. But I will stop there so that we can perhaps transition over to Faith.
And here, delighted to hand you all over to Faith, who was Northeast Youth of the Year. And what year was it, Faith? What year was that?
2022.
2022. Youth of the Year is one of our premier programs where young people compete on multiple levels, at a local, at a state, at a regional level, and then at a national level, and is a testament to Faith's leadership, thoughtfulness, deep commitment to really bettering the world and society for young people and for the future at large. And now I'll go quiet, Faith. That's all you.
Thank you so much. That was such a kind introduction. I'm really glad to be in front of this group. I always love doing things like this because whenever I have partnerships with the Boys and Girls Clubs and help do work like this, the audience is always very active and receptive. So thank you all for being here. I know Omar just gave me such a great introduction, but I guess I'll start by saying a little bit more about me. My name is Faith Amusafi. I am a sophomore at Amherst College. I study philosophy and law, jurisprudence, and social thought. And I was the 2022 Northeast Youth of the Year. My platform then was surrounding changing the way we think and really using our words in precise and accurate ways so as to not paint stereotypes of specific marginalized groups or further any misconceptions that harm groups of people. But right now, what I wanted to focus in on about the beautiful presentation we just heard was something that Omar said at the very beginning, which is this thing we are calling youth right now. And it's kind of funny because I understand it as this thing, as in the survey that we're calling youth right now. But I wanted to further close in on that statement because I found it really powerful. This thing we are calling youth right now. A lot of the times we focus in on the distinction between youth and adult, and we think it's a line set in stone as if they're two different species. But the truth is we are so much more similar than you could have ever originally thought. The feelings of anxiety, of insecurity, of wondering if you're doing the things that you're supposed to be doing correctly, of trying to compete with your peers are all emotions that we both share. The difference comes when we think of the experience level that adults have in relation to teens. So what I really want to focus on here is how to build that bridge so that teens don't view adults as a different species that they can only get lectured by, but as a source for acquiring knowledge that they couldn't otherwise find out for themselves. Something else in the survey that I thought I really wanted to touch on was this idea of mental health, which is the overarching theme of the entire presentation that was given. The most important thing in the minds of the youth right now, and the things that are the thing that is most impacting the youth right now. And in particular, as Omar foreshadowed, I wanted to talk about social media and this new word we're calling doom scrolling, which I only learned last semester in my anthropology class. Doom scrolling is a type of consumption of media where somebody sits on their phone and goes on a social media app and just scrolls for hours, but they're not really enjoying the content that they're consuming. It's consuming for the sake of consumption because you feel like you're so bored you have nothing else to do. But the damages that come from consuming media in this way are apparent. Feelings of low self-esteem arise from it, unrealistic expectations of what body should look like, the bullying in the form of believing that you have complete anonymity on one side of the screen and therefore treating the people on the internet as if they don't exist in real life. It makes it very hard for youth to connect to one another. But in particular, the advertising on these apps, when we get to using it, is important because especially young girls are getting this notion that you have to have a specific kind of body and that one type of body is beautiful for every single woman they see. When you scroll on these apps, you see a plethora of women with hourglass body shapes, regardless of their age, usually thin. And what is a somewhat modern invention, although it has come about in the past few decades, is this concept of a double zero that exists for women's fashion, but doesn't really exist for men's fashion. If we really dissect the phrase we're using here, it's telling women that they need to be nothing, that they should aspire to this experience of being nothing, rather than starting at one and moving forth that way. And this obsession with thinness is causing a lot of young women to have unhealthy relationships with their body and unhealthy relationships with food. And I think that is a source of mental health that we need to really unify to rectify by connecting with the youth and making sure that they understand that they don't have to be thin in order to be beautiful, or they don't have to uphold one specific form of beauty in order to be seen as somebody who's aesthetically pleasing. Moving into the things that I wanted to talk about, the advice that one teen gave to adults about sometimes you just want to be loved but not lectured is kind of the theme that I wanted to poke at, because if we're looking at a call to action about what we as adults and we as youth can do to come together and fix the problems that we as youth are facing, we need connection and grounding. A somewhat personal story is I never really had a connection with my parents about their childhoods because they grew up and they had hard lives. And so they wanted to shield me from the pain of knowing the pain that they had to endure. But this break, I had time to chat with them about some of the things that they talked about and some of the things that they did that they didn't consider right. And I thought how powerful and how beautiful of a moment that was. Because I felt it was a transformation in our relationship where I began to see my parents as people. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. But I needed to see them as people because I needed to know I could lean on them without them having this completely moralized look down on me whenever I do anything that is wrong. So I would say that you need to remind the youth that they are beautiful with their flaws and that you also are flawed, so that we can come together and bridge the gap towards this mental health, towards ending this mental health crisis and helping the youth right now. Thank you. Are we moving on to the question and answer section?
Yeah. So I just wanted to say, first of all, you should look at the chat because you're getting a lot of positive feedback and appreciation for your vulnerability and your candor.
Oh, thank you,
So
everyone.
take a minute to do that. And also wanted to open it up for folks. If anybody wants to come off mute and have a question or a comment for any of our 3 wonderful Boys and Girls Clubs folks, please do so. We'll give you a second to think about that. And thank you for all those chat affirmations. I'll just say that, you know, your example, which you said so many things in such a short amount of time, incredible. But your example, I think, is something that all of us can take both personally and professionally, and certainly for youth, but probably for all of us. Like, you know, people want to be loved, not lectured. So how do we really live that? So super powerful. I think what we'll do, we've got some prompt questions, and we're going to go into small groups. Now, okay, I'm going to ask people, we've got on Eastern time, it's 12:38. So we've got about 20 minutes left of this meeting. And I know there's probably a lot of things that are on your screens right now and things that are calling for your time. And I know it's always risky to go into small groups because some people are like, okay, I'm out. So let's try not to do that. Let's try to stay for, 10, 15 minutes and have a discussion so we can really think about the things that Faith said and Omar and Alex and how we want to take that in for the work that we do with young people and the relationships that we have with young people in our life. So that's just my ask, and want to thank the 3 of you too for a terrific beginning to this. So we're going into small groups. Our prompts are, how do the study findings, and we do have the PDF that was dropped into the chat too, so you can look back at that deck. But how do the study findings resonate with your own experience with young people, and how might some of the things that you saw and heard today spark thinking about changes in your own approaches, and what more do you want to know? And so those are things that we'd love for folks to talk about. And then we'll spend some time in our small groups, and then we'll come back and do a quick wrap. So Rebecca, whenever you're ready. Welcome back, everybody. And thank you for staying through the small groups and back here. I really appreciate that. I hope that you have found this hour to be enlightening and uplifting, and that you met somebody in small groups that you never met before, and you learned something from Omar and Faith and Alex. I know I did. So I want to thank the 3 of you for coming on and for the work that you do, the work you did both to prepare for this, but then the work you also do at Boys and Girls Club and life. Best of luck to you, Faith, in your studies, and I'm sure our paths will cross again. Rebecca's putting a few things in the chat. I hope everybody will join us next month. That's the 3rd Friday as usual, and we're going to talk about policy outlook. So a little bit of a connection with what we got to touch on today, but we're going to dig into it next month about the policy outlook for OST in 2024 with a bunch of policy partners. So please do join us, and just want to say, have a great weekend, everybody. And we were glad you were here today.